In a dusty gas station on the edge of nowhere, where the hum of fluorescent lights drowns out the whispers of the past, a woman with scars on her skin and steel in her eyes stalks shelves in silence. Trina Cross carries a tattoo that's more than ink. It's a map of a war she survived, a unit erased, and a truth buried under years of being unseen. But what happens when the world finally notices? When the quietest soul in the room becomes the loudest voice for those who were never heard? Step into Trina's story, a tale of grit, grace, and the courage to turn pain into purpose. You'll find yourself wondering, who's standing in the shadows of your own life, waiting to be seen? ChatGPT denied. She didn't answer the mockery, didn't flinch at the laughter. When the crude joke about her barcode landed like a slap in the quiet store, Trina Cross simply shifted her weight, lifted another crate, and kept moving. The skin just above her hip, barely visible beneath the hem of her sweat-dampened black shirt, revealed the faded remains of an old barcode tattoo. To most, it looked like some odd, maybe misguided body art. To Ray Hulcom, who had been quietly pouring coffee near the back wall, it was a ghost. He froze mid-pour. 429A, his old unit, the one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, wiped out, gone, declared KIA without recovery. But here she was, alive and lifting crates of soda like it was just another day in a roadside convenience store, like she hadn't bled out in some hellscape years ago. Outside, the midday sun scorched the crumbling asphalt in front of Depot 16. The market was the sort of place people forgot until they needed gas or cheap cigarettes. Inside, Trina moved with a kind of mechanical efficiency that only came from deep muscle memory. Scan, bag, count, change, restock. Her arms glistened from hours of work in the thick heat. Sleeves of her black company tee rolled high, revealing lean muscle and old scars. Most customers moved through with a kind of polite disinterest. That suited her perfectly. Until Donald Graves swaggered in. He kicked the door open with the bravado of a man who believed the world owed him its attention. Two others followed, Grant and Lewis, laughing too loud at a half-told joke. They looked like a corporate ad for bad taste. Polos, gelled hair, smug smirks. Trina didn't so much as blink. She kept her head down as she rang up an elderly woman clutching a bundle of instant noodles. "Morning, sweetheart," Donald boomed, projecting loud enough for the entire store. "Missus?" The old woman looked up at him with a frown, then turned to Trina with a glance full of quiet sympathy before shuffling out. "Didn't think so," Donald muttered, chuckling to himself. He grabbed a Red Bull from the cooler and tossed it casually behind his back. Grant, at least Trina thought it was Grant, caught it one-handed. Lewis pulled out his phone, already recording as they spread through the store like vultures. Trina kept her eyes on the register. The scanner beeped. Beef jerky. "Hey, Graves," Lewis said, phone aimed toward her. "Think the scanner works better if the product's already labeled?" Donald barked a laugh. "You mean her? Come on now, show it again, sweetheart. That barcode you've got inked above your ass. Let's see if it scans. Who knows, maybe you're on clearance today." The laughter rang out, hollow and forced. Trina didn't look up. She stood, slow and deliberate, her movements precise. She turned, stepping toward the shelves behind the counter. Her shirt clung to her back. The tattoo stayed hidden. Donald took a step forward, undeterred. "Don't be shy," he crooned. "We just want to know. Deluxe model or bargain bin?" Greg snorted, nearly choking on a soda he'd grabbed. The humiliation was thick in the air, but Trina absorbed none of it. Ray, still by the coffee station, hadn't moved. But when she reached for a box on the top shelf and her shirt lifted, just slightly, he saw it again. 429A. His heart slammed into his ribs. His grip tightened around the flimsy styrofoam cup. "You all right, man?" Lewis called out with mock concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ray didn't answer. Couldn't. His brain was spinning. That number, 429A, wasn't just a code. It was a grave. His unit. Declared locked every single one of them. And yet here she was. The rumors had whispered of a mechanic, someone who survived, but no one had believed them. Donald leaned in again. That look, the "I can't hear you" look, ain't that cute? Still, Trina didn't move. Donald grinned. Tell me, sweetheart, that ink mean anything? Or just some war-themed fashion statement? Greg made a slurping noise with his soda. Maybe it's her price tag. Picked her up off some scorched battlefield. Marked down. Ray set his coffee down slowly, hands trembling slightly. His eyes never left her. Finally, Trina spoke. Her voice was even. Cool. You buying anything? Or just here to run your mouth until it dries out? Donald didn't flinch. He smirked. Depends. You got any self-respect on sale today? Dignity behind the counter? Ray took a step forward. Trina's eyes flicked to his. They met, just for a moment. And what he saw in them wasn't fear. It was forged steel. That look he'd seen on the battlefield. That silent defiance that said, I've seen death, and I told it not today. Donald pulled his phone close to her face. Smile for the camera, barcode. You're about to be famous. Trina didn't blink. Her voice dropped to a murmur. One word. Good. Donald paused, confused. Trina leaned in, close enough for him to hear without the others catching it. Because when you hit upload, you're not just sharing a video, you're starting a war, one you're not ready for. Then she turned back behind the register, scanning the next item without another word. Ray exhaled slowly. A storm was brewing. He didn't leave with the others. Instead, he hovered near the drink cooler, pretending to browse, watching her, studying her. Her movements were too precise, too calculated. This wasn't retail training. This was combat rhythm, every motion efficient, strategic. Donald and his crew swaggered out, laughing like they'd won something. Trina never looked up. Ray stepped forward. Excuse me, he said, soft but direct. She looked up, face perfectly neutral. Yes, sir? He pointed toward her side. That tattoo, 42-9A. Who gave it to you? For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Subtle. A shift. Why do you ask? Ray took off his cap. The faded red number stitched on the front. 1 Infantry, Big Red 1. Because I led that unit, he said, and there weren't supposed to be any survivors. She blinked once. There weren't, she said quietly. Not officially. A can of soup beeped. She handed it to the next customer. No one in the store was watching. She leaned slightly toward Ray. Meet me out back. 1 hour. An hour later, the sun had dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the alley behind Depot 16. Trina stepped out. No apron, just a black tank top and the faint scent of oil and sun-baked pavement. A grease rag dangled from her hand. You came, she said simply. Ray nodded. You're supposed to be dead. I was, she replied. For 3 days. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she crouched beside a metal crate and lowered herself to sit on the warm concrete. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. She didn't flinch, not once. The final drop zone was West Gasney, South Ridge, Trina said, voice low but steady. We were escorting a medevac chopper through enemy territory. Right before we caught mortar fire, we hit a pocket of rough air. Ray Hulcom gave a slow, solemn nod. I remember. I signed off on that mission. Trina exhaled. I was underneath the bird when the first shell hit. Took out the rear stabilizer. The pilot never got the chance to scream. He was gone, instantly. The rest of the team tried to stabilize it, but... She paused, searching for the right word, her eyes distant. It was chaos. Ray took a seat across from her, saying nothing, just listening. I crawled through the wreck, she went on, found the comms panel and tried rerouting. One last signal, one last ping, anything. Then the fuel tank blew. Everything got thrown sideways, and then it all went black. She looked away as though what followed had been seared too deeply to recount with direct eye contact. I came to 3 days later, wedged under a bent hunk of plating. It had started raining. That's the only reason I didn't bake alive under the metal. Ray closed his eyes. He remembered the after-action report. Total loss, no survivors, no contact, all presumed KIA. He remembered the pit in his stomach when he signed the closure order. I dragged myself half a mile west until I found a supply unit, Trina said. Medevac pulled me out, but by then, no one believed I was ever there. They didn't believe you, that Ray asked? Trina laughed, dry and bitter. They thought I was some looter who got lucky with a uniform. One guy said it was a delusional trauma fantasy. The tags they recovered were melted beyond recognition. Ray rubbed his temples, regret settling in his features. But the tattoo, 42 to 9A. No one fakes that. I didn't, Trina said, quiet but clear. I inked it myself. After the army erased me from the books, I needed something. Not just for me, but for every name they let vanish with that mission. A heavy silence fell between them. Neither moved. Eventually, Ray broke it. You should tell them, make it public. Let people know. And then what? Trina replied, shaking her head. A headline for 24 hours. A Veterans Day float? That's not what I'm here for. I'm not looking for vindication. I want people like Greaves to shut the hell up before they rob someone else of their dignity. Ray let out a slow breath. You planning something? She stood and stretched. The sunlight caught the patchwork of scar tissue down her arm, faded but unmistakable. Let's just say I've been paying attention, she said, watching, listening, cataloging. What do you mean? He comes in every Tuesday, she said, talks too loud, drops names, dates, company details. I memorize everything. I keep receipts. Ray looked at her differently now. Not as the woman behind the register, but as a soldier still deep in the trenches, just with different weapons. You never left the fight, he said. No, she said, just changed my tools. Then she turned and walked back into the store, the automatic doors hissing closed behind her. Ray lingered in the parking lot a little longer, letting the heat wash over him. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Not bitterness, not rage, purpose. Tuesday came again like clockwork. The air inside Depot 16 Market was thick with the scent of motor oil and old dust. Trina stood behind the counter, restocking battery packs, her eyes darting to the wall clock. 8:11 a.m., right on time. Donald Greaves strutted in through the glass doors like he owned the place, trailed by his usual entourage, Grant and Lewis. This time, Lewis had upgraded, a clip-on mic for his phone. Trina caught the glint of the mic in the fridge door reflection. She didn't react. Hey, it's our favorite aisle troll, Donald announced with exaggerated cheer. Still rocking that prison barcode, huh? Grant howled. Maybe she gets a discount every time someone scans her. Trina calmly placed the battery pack on the shelf and turned to them with poise. Is there anything I can help you gentlemen with today? Yeah, Donald sneered, leaning against the counter. Why don't you explain how someone like you ends up working here? Too many kitchen fights in prison? Or just too ugly for a waitress gig? He grinned. Lewis's phone was already recording. You should smile more, Donald added, reaching toward a rack of candy bars. People might almost think you're human. Please don't touch the merchandise unless you're buying, Trina said, her voice flat. Donald smirked and raised his hands like a martyr. Meanwhile, Ray slipped in through the side door unnoticed. He gave Trina a slight nod but kept his distance, heading toward the fridge. Hat low. Phone recording. Trina rang up the candy bar Donald finally tossed on the counter and slid the receipt toward him without looking up. You ever think about getting that thing removed? Donald asked, gesturing toward her waist. She didn't reply. I mean, unless you want people to know where you were tagged. Let me guess, black site, secret weapons lab? Or you just like the idea of being branded? Ray's fingers tensed around a bottle of iced tea. Bet she did it for a guy, Grant said. One of those convict types, tattoo loyalty and all that crap. She probably branded him, Lewis snorted. Can't see anyone else volunteering. Trina's voice sliced the air, quiet but razor sharp. You boys really confuse cruelty for charisma. Donald's grin curled nastier. Careful. That tone might cost you this job. Trina tilted her head slightly. Oh, would you fire me yourself? Or have your assistant type up the termination letter while you practice quoting fake HR policies in the mirror? Grant chuckled, but his laughter wavered. Ray stepped forward and placed his iced tea on the counter with a firm thud. Trina scanned it silently. Donald narrowed his eyes. You two know each other? Ray answered without hesitation. No, but I know people who've survived worse than you and still don't back down. Lewis snorted. What's this? Gas station Gandhi. Donald leaned closer, nostrils flaring. You got a problem, old man? Ray didn't flinch. Only when people confuse volume for strength. Trina's hand brushed the scanner again. Then she leaned forward just a fraction, her gaze fixed on Lewis. Smile for the camera, she said. You'll want to capture this next part clearly. Donald rolled his eyes. What, you gonna give a monologue now? Without a word, Trina lifted her shirt slightly, just enough to reveal the barcode tattoo inked into her waist. Ray held his breath. I got this ink to remember the ones who didn't make it back, she said, her voice low but resonant. People who died doing actual work, not hiding behind keyboards or outsourcing their conscience to interns. She let the shirt fall, then added, her voice turning cold steel. And every week you come in here running your mouth like you own the world. What you don't realize is that I remember everything. Names, accounts, companies, Tim's, dates. Donald blinked. What the hell are you talking about? I've been taking notes, Trina said. You don't even know how much you've already admitted on tape. Ray watched as the confidence slowly drained from the men's faces. Lewis's phone lowered slightly. You think they're just jokes, Trina said, but you've name-dropped clients, bragged about firing employees who didn't fit your image, and even explained how to falsify termination records. I know exactly what Mitchell and Greaves really does behind closed doors. Donald's eyes flicked over to Lewis. Delete the video. No, Trina said, her voice cutting through the space with sharp precision. Keep recording. People deserve the truth. Donald's face twisted with anger. You want to humiliate me? Go ahead, she said, standing firm, but do it knowing every word might already be sitting in someone's inbox. Grant let out a strained exhale. Ray leaned forward, just slightly, his voice low but steady. She's not bluffing. Donald's jaw clenched. He took a breath, ready to lash out again, but Trina cut him off coldly. Walk out of this store, Donald, and pray that what I know never comes to light. He froze, eyes locked with hers, breathing hard. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his back on her and walked away. No more words, no final insults, just the quiet chime of the door closing behind them. Ray finally let out the breath he'd been holding. You sure you're not military intelligence? A faint smile tugged at the corner of Trina's lips. Let's just say I fix broken things. She paused. Some of them are human. Ray nodded, his expression unreadable. I hope you know what you're starting. I'm not starting anything, she said calmly. I'm finishing it. Outside, the sun blazed over Depot 16 Market without mercy, but inside, the air had shifted. A current of change ran beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. Work carried on, boxes shelved, receipts counted, customers checked out. Trina moved through the familiar motions behind the register with her usual quiet focus. But her mind moved like a tactician's, sharp and deliberate. She knew today would not be like the others, not after last week's confrontation. Ray had shown up that morning, early, unannounced. He didn't say much, just nodded at her, a silent exchange between people who had seen too much and lived to carry it. He lingered in the back near the magazine rack, keeping his eyes open. Trina's phone buzzed in her back pocket. One vibration, just one. She pulled it out, checked the screen. A notification blinked at her. Scheduled upload, right on time. At exactly 8:32 a.m., the front glass door rattled. Donald Graves stepped in first. There was something off about his posture. Stiff, overcorrected, like a man trying too hard to seem unbothered. He wore sunglasses inside, despite the gray, cloudy morning. Behind him, Grant walked in, noticeably more subdued than usual, and Lewis trailed last, fidgeting with the mic clipped to his collar. They picked up their usual junk, energy drinks, protein bars, a pack of jerky, but the bravado was gone. Their voices were quieter, laughter forced and uneasy. Trina greeted them with calm professionalism. Morning, she said evenly. Donald didn't meet her eyes. A long silence passed. You good, barcode? He asked finally, attempting nonchalance. Always, she answered. Want a receipt? Donald hesitated for a second, then shook his head. Grant stepped forward, rubbing his eyes. Long week. he muttered. Trina lifted an eyebrow. Rough few days? Grant shrugged. Couple of our clients got jumpy. Weird timing. Strange, Trina said, casually bagging the items. Almost like something's making them nervous. Donald's body tensed again. You trying to say something? Her smile was mild, almost serene. I don't have to say a thing. You're already hearing it. That was when Donald's phone pinged. Then another ping, and another, one after the other like a slow building storm. Ray, still by the magazine rack, raised an eyebrow, watching Donald's face go pale. Donald yanked out his phone, stared at the screen, lips moving silently as he scrolled. Then he looked up, stunned. What the hell is this? He turned the screen to Trina. You posted this? Trina barely glanced at the screen. A video played, raw footage from one of their recent Tuesday mornings. No edits, audio clear, subtitles visible. Donald's voice was unmistakable. You fire the ones that don't fit. Document it later. Cultural misalignment. Productivity excuse. Whatever checks the box. The footage cut to another moment. Lewis laughing. Client doesn't like her. Just call it restructuring. Trina remained silent. Behind her, Ray took a step forward. Donald's hands trembled. You recorded us? No, Trina said simply. You recorded yourselves. I just made sure it didn't disappear. Lewis's face flushed red. You can't just leak stuff like that. I didn't leak anything, she replied, unwavering. I shared a personal experience. Apparently it struck a chord. The door chimed again. 2 new customers entered. They didn't speak, didn't shop. They moved with quiet authority, military posture, unmistakable. They stood near the fridge, observing everything. Grant leaned toward Donald, whispering, I think that's Carter. From Steele and Ward. He's seen the video. Trina folded her arms. You've been calling me invisible for months. Turns out invisible people hear everything. And when they speak, she glanced at the others. The world listens. Ray looked directly at Donald. You should go. But Donald wasn't ready to yield. You don't understand. We have partners, investors. This could destroy your reputation. Trina's gaze didn't waver. You should have thought about that before you built it on other people's humiliation. He took a step closer. Do you even know what you've done? I do, she answered. I've reclaimed the ground you thought you owned. One video at a time. Donald's phone rang. The screen lit up. Simmons and Gray Legal. He didn't answer. He just turned around and walked out. Ray waited until the door clicked shut behind him. That the only one you posted? 3 more, Trina replied. Queued for timed release. This is just the first ripple. Ray chuckled under his breath. You fight like a field op. I was a mechanic, she said, but I listened to everyone, and I remembered everything. She met his eyes. Now they don't get to forget. Outside, Donald sat in his car, hands covering his face. His phone was a storm of alerts, screen blinking with relentless consequence. Inside the store, one of the new customers approached the counter. He didn't raise his voice, didn't announce himself. You're the one from 429A. Trina nodded slowly. He didn't speak at first. Then quietly he offered a small, respectful salute. I knew Lieutenant Howe. He used to talk about a mechanic who could keep a squadron in the air longer than physics allowed. Said she could rebuild a rotor with duct tape and instinct. Trina's voice softened. I just fixed what I could. That's enough sometimes, Carter said. Enough to save a dozen lives. He turned and left, saying nothing more. Ray looked at her. Still think hiding would have been easier? She paused. I don't know, but it's definitely over now. The bell above the door rang again. Not another customer. It was Tony, the store manager. He looked stunned, phone still in hand. You're trending. Nationally, he said. People are calling. Reporters, veterans, civil rights groups. Trina blinked. For what? Tony gave a faint, proud smile. For being exactly who you are, and for refusing to stay silent. Trina took a deep breath, grounding herself. Outside, the clouds shifted, and a single beam of sunlight broke through. The war wasn't over, but something fundamental had changed. She wasn't fighting alone anymore, and for the first time in a long while, people were finally listening. He muttered it under his breath, part disbelief, part grudging amusement. Trina sat quietly at the tiny break room table, cradling a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago. She wasn't checking her phone anymore. It had long stopped vibrating and now just radiated heat, as if the chaos inside was spilling into the plastic shell. Messages poured in from every direction: journalists, veterans, civil rights attorneys, even a big-name podcast producer. But she hadn't posted anything new since that first video. The second one had gone live automatically that morning. After that, the internet had taken the reins. That clip, short, candid, devastating, captured Donald leaning casually against the counter, saying with smug indifference, "Honestly, we just make the paperwork match the outcome they want. Fewer black employees, we find performance issues, done." That one cut deeper than the first. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was strategy. Cold, deliberate, systemic, and very, very real. Ray had shown up later in the afternoon holding out 2 bottles of water chilled with condensation. He handed one to her wordlessly. She took it with a nod. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. Trina hesitated. "Feels like I stepped on my own trap." Ray smirked. "That's called tactics." She met his eyes. "Doesn't feel like winning. Feels like I'm just bracing for the next hit." He sat beside her. "That's because you've never had backup before. You're not alone now. You've got momentum. You've got people in your corner." She shook her head, weary. "I didn't set out to be a cause. I just wanted them to shut up." "Sometimes shutting one person up opens a lot of other mouths," Ray replied. At 3:12 p.m., Tony burst through the break room door, waving his phone like it was on fire. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, breathless. "The Department of Labor just left a voicemail. They want to talk to you, on the record." "Me?" Trina blinked, stunned. "They said you might have key information tied to workplace discrimination cases in multiple states." Ray leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow exhale. "Sounds like someone way up the ladder's finally paying attention." By Thursday, a new article dropped. The headline read, "Veteran Mechanic Outs Discriminatory Practices with Video Evidence. The Quiet Power of Trina Cross." It wasn't clickbait. It was careful, researched, and honest. The piece talked about her barcode to her scars, her survival story, but most importantly, it cited the actual violations. Quotes, timestamps, corroboration. Within hours, 3 more outlets picked it up. Trina stayed off social media. Ray helped it shoulder the flood, screening her calls, blocking the trolls, forwarding only the messages that mattered. Then the email came from Maya Barnes, senior investigator at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Subject line, "Formal inquiry and witness coordination. Mitchell and Graves." She didn't open it right away. Instead, she handed the phone to Ray. He read the email silently, then looked at her with a quiet intensity. "This is real," he said. "You started something real." "I didn't mean to go federal," she whispered. Ray gave a nod. "That's exactly why it had to be you." On Friday morning, the third video was posted. It was shorter than the others, but far more damning. It captured Lewis speaking casually, without knowing he was being recorded, about the usefulness of quiet intimidation and how people with trauma, especially minorities, would fold fast under pressure. There was no laughter this time, no smug bravado, just cold, unmistakable cruelty. The comment sections exploded. Nadia Gonzalez, a former employee at a Graves affiliated company, wrote, "This happened to me. They told me I didn't fit the cultural energy. Now I know what that really meant." Another user replied, "My termination letter had the exact phrasing Donald used, word for word." Trina scrolled silently, absorbing every word, feeling the weight shift. This wasn't just her battle anymore. Ray placed a folder in front of her. Inside were printed emails, scribbled notes, receipts, field records. "What is this?" she asked. "I called a few of the guys from your old unit. We've been piecing things together," he said. "You deserve the full record." Trina's fingers brushed against the edge of her report. It had her name stamped on the header, but was marked classified, not validated. Someone had buried her under bureaucracy. "They filed you under anomaly," Ray said softly. "Didn't know what to do with a survivor no one expected." She didn't say anything for a while. Then, let's not let them decide. The following Monday, the storm came, not from the sky, but from consequence. Mitchell and Graves released a formal statement denying everything. They blamed deepfakes, distortion, context manipulation. It detonated in their faces. Within hours, digital forensics experts publicly debunked every claim. By that afternoon, the company's website crashed. 3 major clients terminated contracts. 1 high-profile investor pulled out. Then Tony brought her an envelope. No return address, just a name written in sharp, unmistakable penmanship. Lieutenant Commander Marie Harding, U.S. Army, retired. Inside was a photograph. A much younger Trina, grease-covered and grinning, perched on the hood of a scorched military transport vehicle. Standing beside her was Lieutenant Howe. On the back, scrawled in black ink, "She saved us. Don't let them rewrite it." Trina stared at it for a long time. Then she reached for her phone and called Maya Barnes. "I'm ready to testify." That night, Trina and Ray sat together on the curb behind Depot 16. Neither said much for a while. Then Ray broke the silence. "You've already won, you know." She shook her head. "Not yet." "Then what are you waiting for?" For the silence to stop echoing. He looked confused. Trina tapped her temple gently. "It's not just out there. It's in here, years of being told I was a glitch, a fluke, that I didn't belong. Sometimes the hardest war is proving to yourself that you exist." Ray nodded, solemn. "Then maybe now, it's time to rewrite the battlefield." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Maybe." At dawn, the final video dropped. No caption, no warning. Just an upload to the same account that had already cracked open an industry. This one didn't start with laughter or taunts. It began with silence. Then Donald's voice, low and confident, cut through. "You can get away with anything if you bury it under enough policy jargon. That's the real power. Nobody's brave enough to challenge paperwork." It lasted just 40 seconds, but that was all it took. By 7:30 a.m., it had reached Reddit's front page. By 8:15, it was trending on Twitter. And by 9 a.m., every major news outlet had linked to it. Trina didn't watch. She didn't need to. She remembered every syllable. But now the world was listening. The fallout was swift. Mitchell and Graves' headquarters in Denver was forced to shut down midday as a wave of protesters, mostly veterans, gathered outside. Their sign said it all. "Respect has no expiration date." She fixed birds. Now she's fixing justice. By noon, partner companies began issuing their own statements. And by 1 p.m., the board of directors made its announcement. The news came suddenly while Trina was wiping down the soda machine. Tony burst through the back doors of Depot 16, phone in hand, his voice low but urgent. "They're ousting him. The board just voted. Donald Graves is out, effective immediately." Trina blinked, still gripping the rag in her hand. "Already? That fast?" Tony nodded with a mixture of astonishment and pride. "You quietly brought down an entire structure. No noise, no spectacle, just precision. It was brilliant." Trina let out a long breath. "I didn't expect it to collapse so completely." Tony shrugged with a half smile. "Paper palaces don't survive fire." That evening, Trina went home. It had been a while since she'd actually spent time in her apartment. Most nights had vanished into strategy meetings with Ray, conversations with lawyers, interviews with journalists. But tonight felt different. Tonight she needed silence, space, a moment to herself. She reached up into the closet and pulled down an old storage box, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were fragments of the past she'd kept hidden. A neatly folded uniform shirt, an old pair of dog tags, a creased photo of her old unit. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, holding the memories in her hands. Some of those faces never made the news. Most didn't even have anyone to remember them properly. No families who knew the truth of how they died. But she remembered them. Every call sign, every inside joke, every busted rib, every scorched patch job, every night they laughed too hard to sleep. She laid the shirt gently across her lap, and then, for the first time in years, she cried. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time in a long time, She felt seen. The next morning, a man in a well-pressed gray suit arrived at Depot 16. He wore a small badge that read, Department of Labor, Federal Investigation Division. He didn't flash it aggressively. There was no need for theatrics. He introduced himself to Tony with a respectful nod and asked quietly if he could speak with Trina. They sat in the break room. His tone remained calm, but his words hit with weight. You didn't just bring forward evidence. You revealed a recurring pattern, one that extends far beyond a single company. Trina listened carefully. When he paused, she asked, So what happens now? That depends, he replied. Would you be willing to speak on camera? She was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the scratched table. Then, with careful resolve, she said, Only if I control the words. He smiled slightly. That's already happening. By the weekend, a ripple had become a wave. Major corporations were issuing public statements, announcing internal audits, touting new partnerships for diversity and inclusion. Some offered stiff, shallow apologies. But one email changed the entire course. It came from a former HR manager at Mitchell & Krebs. Her name was Rita Haynes. They told me to flag problematic hires without ever saying the word race, she wrote. I still have internal memos. If Trina is willing to fight this in court, I'll stand with her. Rita wasn't just a whistleblower. She was the crack in the dam. Within a matter of days, 4 more former insiders stepped forward, bringing evidence and first-hand testimony. Ray summed it up best. You didn't just start a fire, Trina. You showed others how to light their own. The following Monday, Trina stood outside a federal building in downtown Dallas. A crowd had gathered, not a mob, but enough to fill the space with tension. Reporters waited across the street, kept at a respectful distance. Beside her stood Ray Hulcom, Maya Barnes from the EEOC, and Rita Haynes. A high-level closed-door hearing had been scheduled, pre-trial, investigative, confidential. Trina wore plain black slacks and a soft gray button-up shirt. No jewelry, no makeup. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. The barcode tattoo on her neck was hidden beneath her collar, but she didn't need to show it. Her presence spoke volumes. Inside the hearing room, she was calm, focused. Every question she answered came with clarity and honesty. She explained timelines, gave context for specific video clips, corrected misunderstandings without exaggeration or speculation. When asked why she had waited so long to come forward, her answer came quietly but shook the room. Because no one listens to background noise, she said, and I was raised to believe that women like me, mechanics burned black, only make noise when we're breaking. The room went still. Even the stenographers paused. 3 hours later, as she exited the courthouse, a young woman in her 20s approached. Civilian clothes, nervous expression, clutching something in her hand. A folded note. Trina accepted it wordlessly and opened it. Inside was a single sentence. You fixed my father's bird. Iraq, 2008. He said your hands saved 3 more lives that day. He never forgot. No name. Just 3 initials, IKCMT. When Trina looked up, the woman was already disappearing into the crowd. That night, a local news station aired a brief segment about the case. They had asked Trina for an interview. She refused, but agreed to record a short black and white statement. Sitting alone in a simple chair, she looked directly into the camera and said, I didn't burn for pity. I burned for a cause. And the only thing more dangerous than fire is silence. The screen faded to black. By the next morning, the video had already passed 5 million views. By the end of the week, it had been shared by advocacy groups, veterans organizations, and policy leaders nationwide. Then the letter arrived. It was a formal invitation to speak at the National Veterans Forum. She'd been asked to join the keynote panel titled Women Who Led Quiet Wars. Below that, a handwritten line caught her eye. We saw the barcode. We recognized the warrior. She was still holding the letter when Ray walked into the room. He glanced at her, then the envelope. You going? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up slowly and said, I think it's time. There was no dramatic weather shift, no storm, no thunderclap, but something in the air felt unmistakably different. The following week, Trina stepped out of her apartment wearing jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a faded army ball cap. She looked like anyone, And for once, that felt like the most powerful thing of all. Her story had traveled further than anyone expected. That final video, her words, not anyone else's, was now being used in 3 university ethics classes. It had become a cornerstone in corporate diversity training. It had even been quoted at a congressional subcommittee on employment reform. She hadn't spoken to the press since the forum. She didn't need to. The country was speaking for her now. That morning, Ray drove her to a quiet little coffee shop tucked into downtown Houston. Not for the caffeine, but for the calm. "It's strange," Trina said, stirring her drink. "I thought it would feel louder by now." Ray tilted his head. "Louder?" "In my head," she clarified. "All those years, the silence was like pressure, something I had to hold in my chest. Now that it's out, it's just still." He nodded, soft and understanding. "You emptied it. That's why." She looked out the window for a long moment. What do you do when you've carried a fight for so long, and then suddenly, you're not carrying it alone? Ray didn't answer. He didn't have to. That afternoon, Trina returned briefly to Depot 16, not to punch in, but to meet someone. A van pulled up right as she arrived. On the side, it read, "Veterans Transition Project." A tall woman stepped out, clipboard in hand. Her bearing said military, Air Force, if Trina had to guess. "You must be Cross," she said warmly. "We've had 5 young vets request placement here. Said they wanted to work where the mechanic stood." Trina nearly laughed. "We don't even offer benefits." The woman smiled. "Doesn't matter. They're not looking for perks. They're looking for meaning. And apparently this place has it." Tony took over the tour like a proud older brother. At the end of it, the woman nodded approvingly. "I'll submit the application. This could be our first partnered site, with a private sector veteran mentor." Trina blinked. "Me?" The woman grinned. "Unless there's another Cross out there who dismantled a corporate discrimination ring while bagging groceries." Trina said nothing, but she smiled. A week later, she stood quietly outside a diner down the road. Not Ray's, not Tony's, a different one, and people were starting to notice. Students recorded on their phones. "I know what it's like to be invisible in the place where you work the hardest." She paused. "And I know that when someone finally sees you, not just your scars or your resume, but the whole of you, it doesn't fix everything. But it changes something. It gives you room to move, to breathe, maybe even to build." A quiet filled the hall. Not silence, but attention. The kind that doesn't demand applause. When she sat, Ray reached over and gave her shoulder a quick, proud squeeze. She didn't smile, but her breath came easier. Later that week, Trina began hosting a new session at Depot 16 every Friday afternoon. "Fix It Fridays," the sign read in blocky handwriting, taped above the folding table near the front of the store. "Bring your busted headphones, your fried charging cables, your cassette players, and maybe your stories too." The first one through the door was a kid named Javier, carrying a Walkman older than he was. It coughed static and squealed when rewound. Trina popped it open, her hands deft and quiet, and began diagnosing the damage. "You sure it's worth saving?" Javier asked. She didn't look up. "If it still holds memory, it still matters." Later, a small boy named Marco waited in line with a cracked tablet in one hand and a wary glance in Trina's direction. When it was his turn, he pointed at her arm. "What's that mark mean?" he asked. She didn't flinch. "It's where they tried to forget me," she said, "and where I remembered myself instead." By the second Friday, Fix It had regulars. A grandmother came with an electric mixer, a teen with a cracked speaker, a driver from the sanitation department with a half-dead walkie. Tony passed out lemonade. Isla ran triage. Micah taught a kid to solder. It wasn't just repair, it was ritual. Memory made manual. Then one morning, a small padded envelope arrived, addressed only to the mechanic. Inside was a worn dog tag on a fraying chain and a note. "You pulled me out when everything else burned. Still here because of you. Esati Holderman." Trina closed her hand over the tag and sat with it for a long while. That afternoon, she hung it behind the counter, just beneath the Fix It Friday sign. One by one, these names, these moments, began forming a map, not of pain, but of connection. Trina started sketching it out in her journal. Arrows between events, names circled and underlined. Some days she taped receipts between the pages, or a drawing one of the kids made, a living ledger of purpose. Maya Barnes from the EEOC reached out a week later. She'd read the public hearing transcript, seen the videos, the interview clips. They met at a diner just outside town. Maya arrived with a file thick with photocopies and timestamps. "We're building a case," Maya said, but this," she tapped the file, "only shows the wrongdoing. What you've built shows what survival looks like on the other side." Trina stirred her coffee. "You want me to testify again?" Maya shook her head. "I want you to keep doing what you're doing, but we'll be in touch." Then came a letter from Rita Haynes, the former HR manager at Mitchell and Greaves. It wasn't long, just a scanned logbook page, one that hadn't been shredded like the others. On it, a timestamp, a note. Cross returned, unaccounted in records. It was enough to prove they'd erased her on purpose. In the following weeks, recognition began to grow, not in headlines, but in handshakes. Veterans visiting the market, teachers requesting interviews, parents dropping off their kids with broken toys and leaving with full hearts. And amid it all, Trina kept showing up, one repair at a time, one conversation at a time. Then one afternoon, Quentin Reeve from the Veterans Equity Commission stopped by Depot 16. "We'd like you to speak at our next symposium," he said. "Not as a case study, as a compass." Trina frowned. "What if I say no?" Quentin smiled. "Then we'll know you're leading on your own terms." She didn't say yes, but later that night she pulled the brass plate from her shelf and set it beside the dog tag behind the counter. She wrote 3 words on a sticky note and placed it beneath them. "Still in motion." The journal grew heavier each week, thick with entries, letters, repairs logged in margin notes. She no longer needed to reread the earliest pages. They lived in her now. That morning at the hangar, the cracked concrete, the engine plate, the way her knees had pressed into the soil, and she no longer walked in silence. She walked in signal. She used to scan barcodes with hands still healing from burns, the scars a quiet testament to everything she'd endured and survived. And when someone finally looked her in the eye and said, "We see you," she knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't just about recognition. It was acknowledgement, the kind that travels deeper than applause ever could. But the applause still came, not thunderous, not instant, but the kind that slowly gathers strength, swelling like a tide that had always been waiting for a reason to rise. A week later, the owner of the entire depot chain called her directly. His tone was enthusiastic, almost reverent. He offered her a franchise deal, a role as a regional trainer. He told her the board had voted unanimously, moved by what they were calling the Trina Cross effect, a sudden and measurable 28% rise in performance across rural stores ever since her story had surfaced. She turned him down. "You sure?" the voice on the other end asked, cautious but hopeful. "It's a chance to lead on a much bigger scale." "I already am," Trina said softly and hung up the phone. That night, as the fluorescent lights of Depot 16 buzzed low in the rafters, Micah came out from the back holding a small wooden plaque. It was rough, hand-carved, clearly made with more heart than skill. "We made something," he said, offering it to her with both hands. The plaque read, "Depot 16, built on quiet strength." They mounted it above the back door. The next day, Isla scribbled a note on a torn piece of receipt paper and tacked it just below. Founded by the woman who turned silence into a signal, and time moved on. Trina kept writing in her journal not to dwell on the past, but to draw a map for what might come next. She wrote about the girl from the diner who'd cried into her coffee. She wrote about the students holding microphones with trembling hands. She wrote about grease that lived under fingernails and the acrid scent of scorched metal. About how dignity had nothing to do with paychecks or titles. It was something you chose to carry, even when no one noticed. At the end of that month, she penned one last line. "Legacy isn't carved into walls. It's felt in hands that no longer shake." And on a morning like any other, with Depot 16 standing quiet behind her and a sky unfolding ahead, she stepped forward, not needing a crowd, not needing cheers, just walking. And that, somehow, was enough. It had started with a simple repost. Someone on a military forum unearthed the original video, Trina standing up to Donald Graves. They matched it with footage from a memorial ceremony and added a single caption, 429A wasn't erased. It was reborn. The post spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had reached veteran circles, women's military networks, even law school forums. By day's end, national reporters were calling, asking a now familiar question. Who is Trina Cross? Ray phoned her that night. It's going to snowball, he warned her gently. Be ready. But she wasn't. Not really. The next morning, news vans lined the street near Depot 16, satellite dishes blinking under early light. Trina stayed inside, letting Tony handle the questions. She didn't want headlines or hashtags. She needed room to breathe. But the pressure only escalated. Donald Gravies released a statement. He dodged any apology, instead painting himself as misunderstood, a victim of internet outrage. Soon after, his PR team launched a full damage control campaign. He posted photos shaking hands with veterans, claiming his previous remarks were just satire. Poorly timed, perhaps, but harmless. It didn't help. It made things worse. Trina began receiving anonymous emails. Some thanked her, voices of quiet solidarity. Others were venomous. One message read, "You embarrassed a good man. Hope your 15 minutes were worth it." Another accused her directly. "People like you are why men like him have to defend themselves." Ray offered to bring in someone to evaluate the threats. She declined. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm not afraid." "Swasao," she answered honestly. "Just tired." But fatigue didn't stop the truth from rising. One former contractor stepped forward, then another, then five. All had worked for Donald's company. All carried stories of sexism, of being underpaid, of racial slurs told as jokes, of retaliation for speaking up. One woman had recorded a meeting. Her voice cracked in the clip. "He said I should be grateful I had a job," she whispered. "Said girls with scars shouldn't expect promotions." That audio made national news. By then, Trina couldn't go into a grocery store without being recognized. She didn't want the spotlight, but she understood its purpose. "You broke the pattern," Micah told her one evening. "Now people finally see it." Late one night, Trina received a message from Caleb, a former squad leader from Unit 429A. He was believed to have died, but he hadn't. Like her, he'd survived. The message was brief. "I saw you. I remembered the rotor. You bought us time. I lived because of that." Trina stared at those words for a long time. She never replied. But she saved them. Donald's firm began hemorrhaging clients. Major partners severed ties. Trina didn't lift a finger. She didn't need to. The evidence was everywhere. Ray uploaded the full case files, testimonies, photos, emails, onto a public server. He titled the archive, "The Cost of Silence, a Study in Patterns." It became assigned reading in 2 university courses. Meanwhile, Trina just kept working. One quiet afternoon, a woman walked into the store. Mid-40s, tailored suit, quiet confidence. She ordered a soda. "You're Cross, right?" Trina nodded. The woman handed her a card. "Avery Kim, Legal Counsel, Department of Defense Office." "We're launching an initiative," she said. "Civilian Transition Recognition Frameworks for one. We want you on the advisory board." "I'm not a lawyer," Trina replied. "We don't need lawyers," Avery said. "We need truth." Trina didn't say yes, not then, but she kept the card. Back at her apartment, the mail was piling up. Letters came in from everywhere. Gold Star mothers, retired medics. A young girl wrote, "My brother died in 429A. I never knew what happened. You made it real." Another simply said, "Thank you for not disappearing." Trina built a shelf, not for medals, for the letters. One day, Tony showed up holding a folded newspaper. He grinned. "Front page, Depot clerk exposes empire of abuse," he read aloud. "Never thought I'd see the words clerk and empire in the same headline." She laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from deep inside. Ray dropped by that weekend with the 3 copies of his manuscript. The cover was stark and beautiful. Silhouette of a woman facing into the wind, a barcode etched along her waist. Title, "The Barcode at Her Waist, the Story of Trina Cross." "Too dramatic?" he asked. She flipped through it casually. "You got the part about the wrench wrong," she said. "I'll fix it in the second edition." As summer approached, an email arrived from a teacher in Kansas. She'd assigned Trina's story to her civics class. One student had cried while reading it. "Do you ever speak at schools?" the teacher asked. Trina stared at the screen for a long time. Then eventually she typed her reply. "Yes, I think I do." Her first talk took place in a gymnasium with cracked walls and bad acoustics. Folding chairs, restless students. A flag hung crooked behind her. But she spoke anyway, about repair, about persistence, about how dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you refuse to give up. At the end, a boy raised his hand. "My mom works 2 jobs," he said. "She says she's invisible." Trina walked over, knelt beside him, looked him straight in the eye. "She's not invisible," she said, "and neither are you." That night, she opened her journal and wrote a single sentence. Visibility is the first step toward justice. And in a world that had spent too long looking away, Trina Cross stood like a flare in the fog, silent, steady, unshakable. She didn't scream. She simply shone. And finally people saw. They truly saw. At exactly 6:04 a.m. the phone rang. Trina didn't answer right away. She was in the middle of writing a letter, a reply to a child who had sent her a crayon drawing of a helicopter with a smiley face. The envelope was addressed, "To the lady who fixes things." The second ring broke her focus. She picked up. "Miss Cross," a man's voice said, "this is Quentin Ree from the Veterans Equity Commission. We've reviewed your case, actually your entire story. We're organizing a symposium in D.C. We'd like you to speak." "I'm not a public speaker," she said automatically. "We'll take honesty over polish any day." She exhaled slowly, then said, "Send me the details." Depot 16 felt different that morning. It wasn't the foot traffic, steady as usual, but the way silence hung between each transaction, punctuated by quiet gestures and soft voices. People whispered her name now, unsure whether to approach. Some just smiled, left notes on the counter. A little girl came up to her, shy and bright-eyed, and handed her a plastic toy wrench. "You fixed the world," the girl said. Trina didn't know how to react. She gave the girl a quiet smile, her fingers curling gently around the toy as if it might break. Tony caught the moment and grinned. "You're officially legendary," he said, half joking, half serious. "What's next? Signing energy drinks?" "No," Trina replied. "I'll autograph resumes if they want." Later that week, a documentary crew arrived. Not a flashy mainstream operation, but a small independent team who asked questions with genuine curiosity, not for spectacle. They wanted to know, "Why do you think people reacted the way they did?" Trina took her time. Then she said, "Because I never asked to be seen. But they saw me anyway." One night, Ray showed up with a folded map under his arm. He spread it out over her kitchen table, pins dotting cities across the country. "Take a look," he said. "These aren't just followers. These are sparks. Look, workshops, school projects, community repair groups." One woman turned her garage into a training center for women vets, called it Bay 42. Trina ran her fingertips across the map. "I thought I was buried," she whispered. "You weren't buried," Ray said. "You were planted." Later, Micah pulled her aside at Depot 16. His expression was serious, a quiet tension in his voice. "Isla and I were thinking of re-enlisting." Trina stared. "Why?" Micah held her gaze. "Because this time we know what we're standing for, and who we're standing with." She didn't try to talk them out of it, but when she hugged them, it lasted longer than she meant. At night, she reread the letters. One stood out. "My husband served with 42-9A. He never spoke about it. After he died, I thought I'd never understand what he carried. Now I do. Thank you for giving me back a part of him." She placed that letter on the highest shelf in her room and cried quietly. Then came the symposium in D.C. Trina arrived wearing a plain black dress, carrying nothing but a folder of handwritten notes. No slideshow, no staff, no security. The room was packed with over 300 people. Veterans, lawmakers, students, advocates, men and women in suits, fatigues, denim jackets. She stepped up to the podium, took a breath, and said, "I fixed helicopters. That's what I did." Her voice was steady, unembellished. Not because it was glamorous, but because broken things deserve one more chance. She spoke of mud, of heat, of rotors that refused to spin, of silence heavier than noise, of Depot 16. Then she added, I never raised a weapon, but I held the line, with a wrench and with a promise, for those who didn't come back, and for those who did, but felt invisible. You're not. I see you. And now so does the world. A long moment passed. Then the room rose, not in choreographed applause, but in raw, full-hearted release. Afterwards, a general approached. His voice low, his eyes misted. You remind me of someone I served with. He never wore medals, but he carried all of us. She nodded. He sounds like someone worth remembering. He is, the general said. And now so are you. On the flight back, Trina watched the earth from the plane window. A patchwork of farms, rivers, towns. She thought of Caleb, of Donald, of the inked numbers on her arm, of Greece, laughter, pain. Then she shut her eyes and whispered to herself, let them build what they want. I'll keep fixing what matters. The next morning, light spilled gently over the cracked roads of her town. Her boots crunched across gravel as she approached Depot 16. In her hand, a slim manila envelope. Inside, her speech, the notes she hadn't needed, and the toy wrench the little girl had given her. She unlocked the door, passed the racks of tools and gum, and pinned both on the corkboard beside the staff schedule. There, too, was a new hand-lettered sign. If something's broken, we fix it. If someone's hurting, we listen. Depot 16, around 9, Ray dropped by with a newspaper in hand. You're officially famous, he said, holding out the front page. The headline read, The Mechanic Who Mended a Nation's Memory. Trina didn't smile. Not exactly, she murmured. But she took the paper and nodded. Customers came in, some familiar, some new. One man left behind a dog tag and a velvet box. A girl dropped off another drawing, a helicopter, this time with 3 smiley faces. Micah and Isla had shipped out. Before they left, they wrote, We carry your grit with us. It's better than armor. Trina kept their letter in her pocket. The following week, the school district invited her to speak. She said no at first, then changed her mind. When she walked into the gymnasium, the students were rowdy until she stepped to the microphone. She said only this, Don't ever laugh at someone who carries their past. The strongest people are usually the quietest. And the loudest pain is the kind we pretend doesn't exist. Silence. Then clapping, then standing applause. Some teachers wiped their eyes. A few days later, a deliverer truck arrived. No return address. Inside was a brushed steel plaque, laser-etched with the unit number, 429A. And below it, the last mechanic, never forgotten. Tony mounted it on the wall near the register. A local reporter showed up, asked for a quote. Trina simply said, That's not for me, that's for them. Her journal entries grew shorter, not because there was less to say, but because her words now lived in other people's mouths and hearts. One night she wrote, Legacy is a wrench passed hand to hand. Then Ray called. A publisher had approached him about co-writing her story. Trina agreed, but only on one condition. The book had to list the names of every member of 429A who never came home. She wrote the names herself. Then came the invitation no one expected. The National Memorial Commission wanted to inscribe her name among the honored, on the wall for the unaccounted heroes. Are you sure? She asked. The country is, the woman on the phone replied. So she flew to D.C. again. Not to speak, but to stand in silence. She found her name glinting softly among the others. Not because she asked, but because truth refuses to stay buried. She stood alone for a long moment. Then she stepped aside so others could see. She didn't cry, but the hands that had lifted engines and carried burdens for years, those hands trembled once, then steadied. Back at Depot 16, they held a quiet ceremony. No cameras, just the regulars. A folded flag, coffee, silence. Tony read aloud a letter from a retired major. Sometimes the fix isn't made on the field. Sometimes it's made in a store, on quiet shelves with quiet strength. Thank you for holding the line long after the shooting stopped. That evening, Trina stood outside, watching the sun slip behind the pumps. Depot 16 glowed softly behind her. People still came for fuel, but they stayed for something more now, something wordless but real. She flipped her notebook to a fresh page, wrote just one line, My hands don't shake anymore. And then she closed it, gently. Tomorrow was already on its way. Just before dawn, a knock rapped softly at Trina's door. She opened it wearing her worn work boots and a faded sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her eyes, though calm, carried the sharp alertness of someone who had long since given up on surprises. Ray stood there, phone in hand. "You need to see this," he said quietly. He turned the screen toward her. "Someone sent me this last night, Donald Graves. He went live, on his knees outside your store." Trina didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady. "He said he was sorry. Said the world made him forget what dignity looked like." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned back inside, poured 2 mugs of black coffee, and handed one to Ray. By midday, the video had spread across the internet like wildfire. Raw, unfiltered. A man undone not only by remorse, but by the painful awareness that he had misjudged someone who had quietly earned the world's respect. When Tony watched it, one brow lifted. "You think it's real?" he asked. Trina didn't hesitate. "I think it's public." Later that day, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside, a typed letter on Grivy's Realty's official letterhead. No signature, just cold formality. They were formally withdrawing the lawsuit filed earlier that year. All promotional materials that had misused her likeness had been scrubbed. A written apology was enclosed for your records. Trina folded the letter once, placed it in her filing drawer, not out of resentment, just order. Documentation mattered. 2 weeks passed. Trina stood elbow deep in the back storage room of Depot 16, arms covered in dust and grease, buried in broken shelving parts. She was reworking a corner that hadn't been touched since Caleb's time. Tony peeked in. "What's going on back here?" "Building a space," she said, her voice muffled behind the shelf, "for the kids, the ones who come in wanting to learn how to fix things." It began simply: a small workbench, a single desk lamp, a shelf of borrowed tools. Then she hung the sign, "Fix It Fridays." By the 3rd week, 5 teens showed up after school. By the 6th, it was standing room only. They repaired old toasters, roller skates, even a busted microphone from a neighborhood church. But more than that, they listened to each other, to Trina, to the silence that carried more stories than sound ever could. One Friday, a boy named Marco asked quietly, "Did the tattoo hurt?" Trina paused. A faint smile crossed her lips. "Not as much as what came before it." The boy nodded like he understood more than he let on. Across town, the mayor approached her, invited her to join the local council's advisory board. "I don't do politics," Trina replied, almost instinctively. "That's exactly why we need you," the mayor said. She agreed, but on one condition. Every meeting must begin with 5 minutes of silence. Not for prayer, for remembering. Public servants, past and present. Ray's book was nearing completion. His publisher asked for a photo of Trina for the cover. She refused to pose. Instead, she handed them an old photo Tony had snapped months ago, her hands stained with grease, bent over a coffee machine behind the counter. "That's the story," she said. "Not my face, my work." One night, a girl stood outside the shop for nearly an hour. Trina watched through the glass, said nothing. Finally, the girl came in. She wore an oversized hoodie, sleeves pulled over her knuckles like armor. "I saw your video," she whispered. "The one about the scar." She hesitated. "I have one too, but it's inside." Trina didn't offer a speech, just nodded. "Can I learn to fix things?" the girl asked. "Yes," Trina said. "And you'll find you're fixing yourself too." One morning, Trina walked in and found the wall beside the fix-it bench covered in sticky notes. Each one held a message. "I fixed my bike and my anger. I stopped hurting myself. I told my mom I want to live." Tony found her standing still, eyes on the wall. "You do this?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, they did." The National Veterans magazine ran a feature titled "The Silent Rebuilder." Alongside it was an op-ed by Ray. She never raised her voice. She raised a generation. On the anniversary of Unit 42-9A's final mission, Trina stood behind Depot 16 and lit a lantern. No speeches, no ceremony, just names, whispered into the dark. Each soul remembered. Then she sat until the sun rose. The Fix-It program grew. A nearby town mirrored it. A retired Air Force mechanic volunteered to help. They called it the Cross model. Trina didn't quite know how to feel about that, but every Friday she still showed up. with grease-stained hands, with quiet steadiness, with hope that had ceased to be hers alone. The wind that morning felt different, not heavier, just older, like it carried stories rather than air, moving through Depot 16 like a whisper passed down from one generation to the next. At 6:58 a.m., Trina opened the shop door. As always, the scent welcomed her. Motor oil, coffee grounds, old pine cleaner. Comfort in a bottle, home in a breath. Tony was already inside, prepping the register. He glanced up and grinned. "Sleep a little?" she asked, tossing her bag aside. "Big day," he said, nodding. "You sure about this?" "I've been sure since the scar turned silver," she answered. Outside, folding chairs were neatly arranged under the rising sun. Veterans, students, city leaders, and strangers with cameras stood quietly in clusters. There was no podium, no red carpet, just a slab of concrete sidewalk and a black cloth covering a new metal plaque affixed to the wall. Ray arrived, a binder tucked beneath one arm. He greeted Trina with a quiet, lingering hug. "You ready?" he asked. She exhaled. "Let's do it." At exactly 8 o'clock a.m., and the crowd gathered. No anthem, no speeches blaring through speakers, only birdsong, only breath. Ray stepped forward first. "We're not here to honor a hero who asked for attention," he said softly. "We're here because the truth lives in plain sight now. Because Depot 16, for all its dust and diesel, became a sanctuary. Because Trina Cross reminded us that not all wounds bleed. Some wrench, some weld, some teach." He stepped aside, gesturing to her. Trina walked to the plaque. She stood in front of it for a moment, then reached out and pulled the cloth away. The morning light caught the metal. "In honor of Trina Cross, mechanic, veteran, healer, witness." She fixed what others ignored. Applause rippled through the crowd, gentle, reverent. Trina didn't speak. She simply placed her palm flat against the plaque, held it there for a breath, and stepped back. Afterward, people lingered. Children wrapped arms around her waist. Elderly men pressed dog tags and old coins into her hands like sacred offerings. The local media took respectful photos. Tony handed out free coffee. Ray shook every hand extended his way until his shoulder gave out. A tablet played a video message from Micah and Isla, beamed in from overseas. Depot 16 taught us more than boot camp ever did. It taught us how to stay human in the mess. Thank you, Miss Cross. That night, Trina sat on her back porch. The folded flag from the ceremony rested in her lap. She thought of her unit, of the grit beneath their fingernails, of broken rotors, of days that reeked of metal and fear. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel alone. She no longer felt forgotten. She felt like she finally belonged, like a bolt perfectly fitted into the groove it was meant for. Nothing flashy, nothing showy, just necessary, just right. Depot 16 began staying open later than usual. Not because of policy, but because people kept coming. Some came carrying broken appliances, wounded instruments, rusted memories in need of resurrection. Others came empty-handed, drawn only by the quiet, the kind that wrapped around you like an old blanket and let you breathe again. A man all the way from Arizona showed up one night, holding a guitar with a crack running straight through its body. He said it hadn't played a tune in years. Trina adjusted the strings, reset the neck, worked silently until her hands understood what the instrument needed. When he strummed it again, a sound finally emerged, raw, warbled, but real. He cried. A girl came in next, her science fair project clutched in her arms, a tiny motor that had stubbornly refused to start. Trina sat with her on the bench, helped her rewire the parts until the motor shuddered once, then buzzed to life. The girl's face lit up, and they high-fived like old friends. None of it made the news. No headlines, no trending hashtags. But in that corner of the world, it mattered. At the end of the week, Rai handed her a manila folder. "What's this?" Trina asked. "The last draft," Rai said. It's done. Your list, your stories, your words. We called it The Last Mechanic." Trina opened the folder slowly. The dedication was right at the front, for the ones who fixed more than machines, for those who survived what could never be said out loud, for Petrina, who carried them all in silence, until that silence became a voice. She closed the folder gently, like she was sealing up a memory. That Sunday, the little church down the road invited her to light the remembrance candle. She accepted, but she didn't go alone. Instead, she asked 5 young students from Fix It Fridays to join her. When the time came, each of them struck a match, hands a little shaky but determined. And for the first time in a long while, the candle's flame rose higher than the shadows it was meant to fight. The next morning, Monday, Trina arrived early at Depot 16. The sky still wore the colors of sleep, lavender and steel blue, that slow-moving kind of dawn that didn't push you to hurry. She unlocked the back room with purpose, her steps steady and unrushed. That space, once just a cluttered storage area, had transformed. With Tony's help and the eager hands of the Fix-It students, they had built something more. A workshop, modest but full of soul. Tool racks lined the walls. An old engine block rested under a hanging light. A long wooden bench, scarred from use, stretched the length of the room like it had always been waiting for work to return. Trina ran her fingers across the grain of the wood, felt the grooves like braille for a story only her hands could read. There were no cameras today, no reporters, just one kid, Javier, waiting at the back door, clutching a broken cassette player and a notebook full of sketches. "Thought you might be open early," he said. "I'm always open for folks who show up ready," Trina answered with a nod. They got to work with few words. The silence between them was easy, filled only by the sound of screws being tightened, occasional sparks, and the quiet rhythm of trust being built, layer by layer. By noon, the player crackled to life. The tape was old-school funk, James Brown growling about soul and grit, the way he always did. Javier grinned wide. "Now that's what I'm talking about." Later that week, the book launch took place. Ray hosted it at the community center down the road. The walls were covered in blown-up photos of Unit 429A, gritty battlefield snapshots, handwritten letters from families of the fallen, a timeline marking the days that almost erased them all. In the center, above everything else, hung a massive image of Trina. She held a wrench in her hand, her expression soft but resolute. Above her head, the title read, "The Last Mechanic, a Story of Grit, Ghosts, and Grace." Wow. Trina lingered near the back of the room during most of the event. She'd never liked being the center of attention. But when Ray took the microphone and called her forward, she didn't hide. "I didn't write this book for me," she said simply. "I wrote it for the ones who didn't come home, and for the ones who did, but came back in pieces, who had to relearn how to live. Sometimes quietly, in places like gas stations and repair shops, sometimes by fixing what other people had given up on, just to remind ourselves we weren't too broken to mend." The applause was thunderous. Some people cheered, others cried. A month later, a national news segment featured Depot 16. They didn't show the gas pumps. Instead, they filmed a wall plastered with handwritten thank you notes, a grease-smeared table cluttered with tools, a young veteran embracing Trina, whispering through tears, "I thought no one understood." They showed her barcode tattoo, just briefly, as she lifted a bowl of spark plugs. Viewers called in. Donations came in waves. Someone sent 10 full toolkits. Another offered to fund a scholarship in her name. Trina turned down most of the money, but she accepted the toolkits. Those, she said, could be put to work. Years passed. Some of the kids moved on. College, trade school, the military. Some came back to volunteer. Some never left. Trina herself grew older, not weaker. She aged like oak, quietly, sturdily. Her eyes deepened, her steps slowed, but her hands remained steady. She still wore black boots. The silver scars still stretched faintly along her arm, and outside Depot 16, a bench now bore her name, carved into the wood like a whisper you could sit with. People came and sat there, not to fix anything, but just to remember what it felt like to endure. On the 10th anniversary of the attack that nearly ended Unit 429A, a memorial was held in Washington, D.C. Ray spoke first, then 2 other survivors, then a woman whose brother had never returned. Finally, they called Trina. She didn't walk quickly, but she moved with unwavering purpose. She wore her best denim jacket and her old boots, standing tall behind the podium. One by one, she read each name, clear and steady. Then she paused, lifted her eyes, and said, "Not everyone who serves wears medals. Some of us wore grease and grit. Some of us still do. There was silence, then a standing ovation. That night, she came home to find a package waiting on her porch. Inside, an old military dog tag and a folded note. Miss Cross, I never knew your name until now, but I know I owe my life to whatever it was you fixed that night. Thank you. SPC Holderman, Z9. Trina sat quietly for a long while, holding the tag like it contained a heartbeat. Then she placed it gently in the tin box, beside the others. Somewhere in Georgia, tucked inside a town that didn't appear on many maps, stood a gas station that never closed early. Inside, a scarred mechanic with calloused hands showed kids how to fix more than engines. Outside, a weathered metal plaque gleamed in the sun, not to memorialize tragedy, but to honor what healing really looked like. Not in speeches, not in statues, but in steel-toed boots, in oil-stained hands, and in the unwavering truth that dignity never needed permission to exist. Thank you for walking alongside Trina's journey, through back rooms and battlefields, through silence and scars. At this place, we believe dignity doesn't retire. It rebuilds, it resists, it rises. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in sparks, always in strength. Trina never sought to be a symbol. She didn't want recognition. She didn't crave applause. She just kept waking up, kept fixing, kept helping people find worth in themselves even when the world refused to see it. Her scars weren't flaws. They were blueprints for how to heal. And across quiet corners of this country, people like her still exist. Veterans running local fix-it shops, survivors returning to classrooms, not to teach formulas, but to teach others how to stand again. Men and women carrying the weight of memory, not with bitterness, but with grace. Maybe Trina reminded you of someone, a mentor, a parent, a neighbor, or maybe someone you hope to become. Even yourself, don't forget to include yourself in that thought. Maybe you've made it through fire, through silence so heavy it felt like it could crush you. Maybe you came out the other side not looking for medals or recognition, but with calloused hands and a wrench in your grip, carrying tools instead of trophies. And maybe that's exactly why we see you now. If any part of Trina's story has stayed with you, truly stayed with you, tell us. Was it her quiet resilience? The way she never raised her voice, never fought fire with fire, but chose truth every time, even when it was the hardest thing to do? Was it the strength in her silence? Her courage not to strike, but to endure? Let us know what moments stuck with you. What made you pause and remember something inside yourself? And then, please, take a moment. Think of those people in your life who never made it into any history books, who never stood on podiums, never had plaques with their names etched in bronze, and yet they shaped you. They showed up when it mattered. They helped you become who you are, even if nobody else saw it. Tag them. Share this with them. Let them know you noticed. Let them know they mattered and still do. If Trina's journey moved you, if it echoed somewhere inside your own experience, consider subscribing. Tap that bell icon so you don't miss what comes next. The story isn't over, not even close. At Here, we don't chase the loudest headlines or viral outrage. We chase something quieter, something lasting. We chase honor, one true story at a time. And there are more coming. Stories of strength, of sorrow, of sacrifice. Stories of the quiet kind of courage, the kind that doesn't shout for attention or demand applause, but ends up earning it all the same. This is a place where real stories forge real respect. So we'll see you in the next chapter. And until then, keep fixing what you can, keep healing who you can, and remember this, some of the strongest people you'll ever meet are the ones rebuilding quietly, just next door.